I'm Wyatt Cash at Scoop News Group, and we're here at FedTalks with Alexis Bonnell, Strategic Business Executive for the Public Sector at Google Cloud. Alexis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Wyatt, for having me.
Well, it's certainly been an unusual year. In your opinion, what's the biggest storyline in federal IT over the past year?
Oh, goodness, that's a meaty one. I think the way I would think about it is I see kind of it as an iceberg, right? So there's the storyline that's maybe below the water that I think is really interesting, and then the storyline that's really obvious above the water. I think the story below the waterline, if you will, is really this idea of living systems leadership, or the shift in designing systems for intentional change versus designing for a moment in time. And I think this is an absolute necessity in making smart investments and procurement and technology in the future, but it's one that really takes a considered and flexible approach that I think many CIOs and C-suite leaders are finding that evolution too challenging. So that idea of how do I make a real living system for the future that can adapt to change, I think is the below the waterline. Above the waterline absolutely has to be the executive order on zero trust. It was just a real wake-up call, that I think, we would no longer accept that there's a patch for that as our national digital security paradigm.
The nation faced an uptick in cybersecurity attacks in 2020 and 2021. You mentioned the White House executive order, but what else can the federal government do to lead the way to protect information and the national interests against our adversaries?
It's perfect timing for this question because we just hosted our government security summit. And I really encourage, folks, zero trust is something, it's a mindset. And so really exposing yourself to great information, check out the summit and the experts that were in there. And there were a few takeaways that I had. I think, one is that it really proved to me that we need to demystify zero trust. I worry that many CIOs are buying kind of complex piecemeal systems with lots of logos on it, as if kind of the quantity of logos and complexities of the architecture on the page somehow equate to zero trust or safety or the right solution. And I have to admit, I call this paranoia-ware because I think people are buying into sometimes marketing promises that make them feel better, but without actually understanding what they've bought or getting locked into solutions that maybe don't meet the mark for them truly. And I think what's important about this is that people don't need to reinvent the wheel on this or do it themselves. It doesn't need to take 3 years or 5 years. Really working with organizations like Google, we've done this for 10 years for ourselves. So really kind of holding the bar to those, those organizations that have really done this, had to do it for themselves, had to depend on these own models. And, another example that I like to look at in human terms is that if you're going to have heart surgery, you wouldn't say, I want as many different doctors and materials and gadgets tinkering in my heart as possible. You would say you want the best surgeon with years of experience who've refined the techniques and who use the simple, most effective solution. And I think it should be the same with your security. And, I think the more, moral of the story for me is, don't reinvent the wheel. There's really no benefit to you, and it only gives bad actors more time to hurt you. I think there are a few other things that I was excited about hearing, the experts on. One is that there's actually a lot of experts and resources, and we even have workshops that can help you get started if someone's not exactly sure where to start. And that can include basic assessments, planning, and even helping them leverage products they might already have that have zero trust elements built into them. They can also go on the offensive. They can do active cyber threat detection to more readily analyze their historic and current data logs, and detect threats faster. And they can look at some of the really great prototypes, things like DIU is doing around secure application access anywhere software. So there's just a lot of these kind of steps that people can take. But I think the final one I would end with is being really proactive, to set up whether, it's backups or alternatives to their cloud and productivity tools, because, there's an opportunity to never really have to be a victim of ransomware. And there are incredible options out there for very little cost, but it's just taking that time to really learn, absorb, and feel that confidence that you're really getting the zero trust solution that you want.
Well, next, how would you characterize the pace and success of federal digital transformation efforts today compared to the past couple of years? And what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think COVID-19 sped up digital transformation in my mind by a decade in federal government. And I think that, constituent citizens, they're more savvy. They've been indoctrinated into their digital citizenry, if you will, by commercial levels of service. And they're not satisfied anymore with potentially subpar user experiences they've historically had when engaging with government entities. So all of those things, I think, and many others are really helping federal government kind of embrace and have this incredible appetite, right, around transformation. But I also think it's reshaped kind of the federal mindset in three areas. I think one, we're really just recognizing that data and information are mandatory real-time decision drivers. I think federal public servants, they're seeing they can move faster, they're seeing they can make more sound decisions on faster timelines, and that those decisions benefit their organizations and customers. So the power of data and really federal public servants as information brokers is skyrocketing. I also think it's been interesting because we really saw a move to untether productivity and talent from physical location. And that's actually really game changing in its own right. And the final one is, I think, understanding that really federal government's job is to help the nation navigate change. And really building that living systems approach is really the only way to do that.
Those are some great points. Lastly, and maybe on a more personal note, what in the federal technology landscape most excites you in the days and months to come?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So definitely how big data and information flow is really going to reset the script on inclusion, on equity. We can just see things and understand things if we want to see them that we never really did before and we maybe didn't pay attention to. So that's really exciting. Again, I'm a huge fan of living systems design and leadership thinking. I actually really think it's going to be interesting to see technology and especially AI's impact on what I call time poverty, right? How we give people, customers, our own staff, public servants, more of their time back. Zero waste operations and purpose-driven purchasing, I think, is something that I'm really excited about seeing a trend in, especially federal public procurement. And then finally, the one that I think is going to be really audacious is the intersection of geophysical data and AI, I think, are going to game change how government operates. So those are the things that I'm really watching, Wyatt.
Fantastic. Well, Alexis Bonnell, thank you. It's always a pleasure hearing you, and I appreciate your sharing your insights today with our FedTalks audience about some of the things on the landscape ahead for federal government.
Thank you so much for having me.